whether, I think it was maybe at the Cannes Film Festival or at Telluride, one of them. And it seemed like an epic movie because it takes you through so many countries and so many decades. And I watched today, I really marveled at how he went from city to city and decade, how he advanced it, but in a it's actually a very short movie. I was surprised to learn it's only about 80 minutes long or less. So anyway, you're going to get another treat because we're going to have Nate Cohen on stage as the moderator, and he doesn't come out too often, but this is a film that's close to his heart. And we're going to have Michael Phillips out, who introduced it. And I'd also like to introduce somebody new to the festival. She's a film critic who is at curvycritic.com is her website. She's also an actor. She has a recurring role on Superstore on ABC. And she just published a book called About How to Market Yourself as an artist in the entertainment industry. Please help me welcome Carla Renata.
And here comes Michael Phillips.
Take the middle. Take the middle.
I was just, this is the third time I've seen this film, and it just occurred to me that this is a perfect film. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Perhaps, yeah, that's.
I thought we were done. I'm sorry. I thought that was it.
That was it. I mean, that's what I thought. What else? What is there to say? It's so moving. The film came to the festival this year. Last year, Ted Hope was here. Ted Hope is the head of Amazon Studios. This is an Amazon picture. And the last thing he said to me before he left last year was, see our film Cold War in Cannes. So I mentioned that to Chaz, and we both saw it in Cannes and fell in love with it, and that's how it ended up here. For me, it's a bit of a personal film in that I spent a lot of time, for reasons I won't go into here, behind the Iron Curtain in the mid-'60s. And it just captures what life was like there during that time. It just, the comparison between communism and capitalism. So the first thing we should talk about, I think, is why is it called Cold War?
You want to talk?
Yeah, I'll handle that. So I interviewed Powell Pawlikowski and Joanna Kulig, who played Zula. And Powell told me that the film was called Cold War because the love affair takes place during that time. And he wanted to honor his parents in that way. And he could not foresee giving it another title other than that in order to capture the love story during that particular time in history.
So what's more important then, the love story or the...
Now, I'm a woman, so I'm going to say the love story. But I think the love story is the through line for the film because it deals with unrequited love, that type of love that you have for another human being, being someone that you love them wholeheartedly, but you're just not good together. And he told me that his parents had that type of relationship, that they loved each other wholeheartedly, but they just were not good for each other.
But wouldn't you say that the politics, the communism, capitalism, the hegemonic forces that were in play at the time, that if all that hadn't happened, if that didn't exist and they came together in normal times, don't you think the story would be much different?
No, I don't think it would be different. There's a line in the movie where it says, love is love and that is that. So I think it wouldn't have mattered what time it was. When you love somebody, you love them. It doesn't matter, and especially if it's somebody that you love them, but you just know they are not the right dude for you. They're just not the right dude, and you should leave them alone. But there's that chemistry and that energy that just keeps drawing you together no matter what.
And there's so many movies we've seen, and Hollywood's turned out thousands of them, literally, along with films all over the world, where you have, the kind of tempestuous romantic relationship, and the, historical forces sweep in every 20, 25 minutes to give you a large-scale, facile sort of explanation of political change or something, or else just a battle scene or something, where, the historical winds just blow through and whirl them into their either separate orbits or together again. And this film works in a very different way. It feels large, as Chaz said, but it's really a chamber piece about a handful of people. And I've never seen a film in years, anyway, that worked it all together so effortlessly. It just feels like it doesn't have that historical pageant feeling. You know what I mean? Even though Pawlikowski's, is it Pawlikowski's?
Pawlikowski.
Okay, W's. I've been doing V's for W's. Pawlikowski's very fond of the fixed camera shot, so you get the sense of time moving quickly, but you're always, boom, catching them at these sort of slightly heightened moments of togetherness, that it doesn't feel like it's not trying to be documentary realism or any of that.
When you talked to the director, did he talk anything about the framing, the composition? I noticed, the amount of headroom that is left in the frame. Characters are always below the middle line of the frame. Did he talk about that?
We did talk about that, and I asked him exactly that very question, and he said that he wanted to frame it like it was a painting at a museum. He wanted every frame in which it was a single shot or a wide shot or a dual shot for it to look like it was a painting in a museum, so that you could put yourself in that one moment in time and just live in it for a second before he moved on to the next thing.
There are two particular shots in the film that stick with me. The one is early in the film when they're standing in front of the wall, the mirror that's the wall, and
That's a great shot.
You're not sure until he comes up to talk to them exactly what that is. The other is the long take, the tracking shot in the bar where she's dancing, and the camera tracks with her down and back, and that must have been very, very difficult to shoot. And the fact that it's a single shot just makes it all the more powerful. We don't have too much time, but we wanted to talk a little bit about the music in the film.
Yeah, the music. So also when I talked to Powell about that, we talked about the fact that he used the folk music, the Polish folk music, because he said that was an integral part of his parents' life and his life growing up. So he could not do that film without integrating that type of music. And then as we moved forward to Paris during the 40s and the 50s was very heavily jazz influenced. So he used every different sector of the jazz influence into the film with there's a Billie Holiday song at one point that's playing. There's another song that's featuring Louis Armstrong. And then side note, when I spoke to Joanna Kulig about the music and the dancing, she actually was a participant in a singing competition which was like American Idol for Poland. And that's how he found her. I know, right? And that's how he found her. And he told me that if Joanna wasn't able to do the film, he wasn't going to do it. He would not do it without her. But the dancing shots that they did, the dancing shots took days and days and days and days. And Joanna didn't know how to dance at all. So she had to learn how. The troupe that she was dancing with was a real Polish troupe, and they taught her the dances and choreographed it and made it look like she was really proficient at it, but she said she didn't have a clue.
I just read too that she is going to be one of the stars of the eight-part Netflix series that Damien Chazelle, who did La La Land and Whiplash, is going to do, set in kind of a Paris jazz setting, right?
I'm
modern
looking forward
day.
to that.
Yeah.
It's going to be great.
Yeah, that's I saw that particular article as well. I mean, compare the two types of music, right? I mean, the Soviet music versus the regimen of it, the ensemble nature of it. There's always a group singing it, with the freedom and the freestyle of the jazz in Paris. I think that says a lot about some of the themes, some of the major themes in the film.
One side note about the music, that song, Two Hearts, Four Eyes, he said it was very important for him to use that one song to illustrate the passage of time through the way that he used it with the different styles of music over the course of the film. So when you first hear it, you hear it as that Polish folk song when she's singing in the audition. Then you hear her sing the full production version of it in the dance segments. And then when we move to Paris, she does it as like a slow jazz ballad. He said it was very important because the whole story revolves around them having two hearts and four eyes. So he wanted to just use that to illustrate it throughout the film.
It's a great festival film, I think, in any festival context, because if you've seen it, you likely really went for it, and you're happy to see it a second time. If you haven't seen it, it's just kind of a wonderful. I'm just astonished at how efficient the storytelling is. I mean, if you're talking about 77 minutes of movie outside the credits, and Ida was the same way. It was like between 75 and 80 minutes long. And if anything, and this is only a sign of what you want more of from a really good writer-director.
Except it seems to take its time.
It takes its time, and it doesn't. And the rhythm varies much. I think right in rhythm with the music. And if anything, I would love to see him, on the next film or sometime soon, really challenge himself to stretch out and just say, okay, what if I had to really explore twice as much? But as is, it is. I'd love to hear what some first-timers thought, actually.
Well, we'll throw it open to questions in a second or comments. Just one thing I'd like you two guys to talk about for a second, the ending.
Oh, yeah, that ending was a little intense. It made me really sad. I'm like, oh, they're going to go out like that? Like, I'd rather have them go over a hillside and run off together. I didn't want them to go out like that. I'm like, oh, that made me so sad that they felt like during that time that was the only way that they could be together.
Yeah, well, she was very considerate to give him more pills than she took.
Well, she said he was heavier, and he was. Did you see how tall he was? He was really tall.
He's 6'6", and she's 5'2", so clearly it was never going to work. Although you could probably ask my prom date in high school the same thing.
Yeah, you're being a tall person yourself.
That's right.
Yeah, and I'm 5'2". So
I love I love that little gust of wind too. That's a lovely, and it's. I mean, I just looked up the review from last year, and I get. It feels utterly fatalistic as a love story, and yet it's utterly gorgeous too. So it's hard to make that not seem utterly morbid in a way, and that is not, at least my prominent, or even any kind of, that's not part of my reaction to this film.
It was humorous too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the fact that he infused humor into a story that was a little dark. It was a little dark. And he infused, especially that one line where he goes back to the apartment and he's with the lady and she says, have you been whoring around? And he's like, I can't afford to whore around.
Yeah. But that goes back to the capitalism versus communism. He wouldn't have had to pay for it in Warsaw.
That's hilarious.
And also, I mean, back to the humor thing, that line about you're heavier than I am at the end is just absolutely perfect in terms of setting the tone for the scene. So let's...
Well, can I ask you one question before, just as a filmmaker? Nate has produced and directed as well, right? Have you not directed documentaries?
Not for a long time.
Not for a long time, but you've worked in narrative features and documentaries. I wonder, since Pawlikowski's got the same breadth in his resume, started out as a documentarian, moved on to narrative features. I wonder if you could, talk to us just a little bit about what that kind of, how that kind of reflects what we experience here. Like, how does he use locations, and how does he use what I would assume is sort of actually a pretty efficient, medium-sized budget? It's not about money, but it's about something else.
No, but it's, I mean, it's very realistic. It's real life. And of course, documentary is that way. But documentaries are made in a completely different way from narrative films. Basically, documentaries have no script. You shoot a whole bunch of stuff, you look at it, and you try to figure out what the movie is. This movie is a very carefully scripted and plotted out narrative. And it's not really shot in a classic cinema verite documentary style. There are a couple shots in there like that. But it is so scripted. I doubt that there's a single line said in this film that was not in the screenplay. And I think it's a better film because of that. As either Gina or Jennifer was saying last night, there are things that refer to other things, and there are shots that refer to other things. The shot of the open dome of the church, immediately when they cut to that shot at the end, it immediately throws us back to the beginning of the film when we saw that very same place. We only have a few minutes because we want to try to stay on time today. I know we set these goals. Sometimes we manage to achieve them, but let's throw it open to some questions or comments from the audience.
To your left, all the way to the back.
I was just struck by how much I felt. I'd only seen this movie today for the first time, and I thought that it was very much like an O. Henry play in a lot of ways, the way it ended, like a worst-case scenario, O. Henry play, and like the most depressing musical I have ever seen. It was beautiful and stark, and I was just really surprised on how he managed to get, the director managed to get everything to look so perfect in such a short amount of time. The movie seemed like it was 177 minutes long, so I just loved it.
You think it's like it's O. Henry-like in that the ending is a surprise?
I think it was more the fact that they seemed to, you pulled for both characters equally at different times, but never at the same time. It seemed like one character was flawed in a way that pulled them apart, and it just kept going back and forth. There was, little things that happened, or big things that happened that pulled them apart. And I think that in the end, it just seemed like they couldn't give up each other, but they couldn't handle each other. And so the ultimate culmination was, the pills. So, kind of in an O. Henry sense. And
that much is autobiographical, because his parents did have a sort of suicide pact at the end.
Yeah, his parents, he was telling me that his parents had a very tumultuous relationship, and he said as their child, it was really hard to watch. It was hard to watch two people that you love, that love each other, not get along, and not be able to love each other enough to keep him happy as a child. And they did have a suicide pact, so it's kind of sad in a way.
You could also look at it as she's communism, he's capitalism, and they're killing each other.
That too.
I like that.
Another.
All right, we have a question to your far left, kind of midway, right down here.
I was struck by the cinematography, the crispness of the movie in the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then it gets murky, and then it comes back and gets back in focus near the end. I don't know if I just noticed that on my own, or if you think that was intentional or imagined.
It's very smoky in Paris. Everybody smokes cigarettes. No, I didn't notice. I think the cinematography is just extraordinary. We're kind of forced this year to compare it to the cinematography in Roma, and I just think this is superior. I think this is far more subtle and it's used to the cinematography is used to make thematic points much more so than in Roma.
And I think the fact that it was in black and white helps a lot, because sometimes when films like that are in color, the brightness and the boldness of the colors can distract from the actual story that you're trying to ingest. So I feel like the fact that it was in black and white made you focus more on the characters and the story than you normally would have in another film.
What about the Academy framing? Did the director talk to you about that?
No, he didn't talk about that.
You know, I know. I read one interview where he spoke of considering briefly this idea of filming it in a really faded Technicolor from like a Soviet musical from the 50s. You know, with kind of washed out Technicolor, because that's kind of what the newsreel and the surviving prints of the stuff from that era looks like. But he thought that was gimmicky, and he just in the end I think was happy with. I know at the end of Ida he spoke of what a relief it was to get back to Poland to shoot a film for the first time in many years, and he just said there's something about, you know, I think it's just that inchoate thing that the exile feels when you find your home again. And he just said he just responded to the landscapes, and I think maybe that's why they're so crisp at the beginning of the film with those great dunk shots of those, you know, of the villagers more or less auditioning for the musicologists, right? For this folk ensemble showcase, and I just that's a wonderful. It's probably my favorite first minute of film all last year.
Yeah. And they sang directly to camera, and you got to notice their teeth, which were not good.
All right, you got a question to right here?
Yes. My question is, my comment first off is, I appreciated, Carlo, what you said about the director's answers to the question about Cold War, but it seemed to me that Cold War is on many levels. One level was the Cold War between the two protagonists. In fact, I might call it cold/hot war. And do you see the Cold War on any other levels?
That's a good analogy. I hadn't thought about it like that, and I've seen this film a lot. It was hands down one of my favorite films from 2018. I haven't really seen anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the same things as you said. I mean, the Cold War between the East and the West. But I mean, it was a tempestuous, warlike relationship that they had with each other.
I don't know how much. There's very little digital futzing, I think, with this whole image we see all through the film. And I think one of the only digital flourishes, I think, unless my eyes playing me false here, is when he walks over to West Berlin alone, and you see a little bit of what the West will look like. But that's it. And I like how it just sort of fades out. It doesn't give you a instant contrast or any of that. And that's probably one of the few digital effects that. Whereas Roma is full of, and right or wrong, you know, Roma is full of a tremendous amount of digital work that was done in post-production and is quite subtle, but it's a different kind of filmmaking.
Another question?
To your left, front.
Two different points. One technical, and the other about the story. The first one, and anybody can respond to either one. The technical one is his ability to have people exit frames and leave the frame blank, or then have them walk into the frame. I thought was interesting and really enhanced the scenes and the power of the scenes. And the one on the story was your response or any of your responses to the metaphor, and how she accepted or rejected the poet's comment on what the metaphor meant about time, and what your reaction to that was. Because when I listened to the poet's response to the metaphor, I nodded my head and thought about the fact that she rejected it because of maybe who it was coming from.
I think she rejected it because what's the point of metaphor in those particular times.
I would agree with that. But I also love what the metaphor meant. Like you said, when you heard it, you nodded your head, and I did too, that love has no time limit. And I thought, wow, it kind of doesn't. When you love someone, whether it's a parent, whether it's a child, a cousin, a best friend, whoever it is, when that person is no longer here in the physical realm, that love that you have for them lives on in perpetuity. So in that respect, love has no time limit. What was the first part of your question again? About the framing?
Yeah, about the framing.
People walking in and out of frame.
Thank you. I talked to Powell about that, and he is adamant about some films like this will have a whole bunch of stuff going on in between the scenes that have nothing to do with the movie, really. And he's very linear in that respect, that he just wants to get on with the storytelling. So that's why a lot of times the frames would just stop and go to black, and then you would go on to the next thing, because he just wanted to propel the story as quickly as possible and not fill it with a lot of flourish in that respect.
And I do love that shot where I think this is the example of what you're talking about, where you have, it's just a matter of 2 or 3 seconds, if that, but where he leaves the sort of from the American eyes, I think, the dream Paris, attic apartment, right? And you see nothing for 2 or 3 seconds since he's gone. And it's what Agnes Varda, when I interviewed her a couple years before she died, said. She really loves this idea of when people exit the frame, where do they go? And in a way, this film sort of flips it and answers it a different way, just because it's always hurtling forward, but you're always given a couple seconds to kind of,
Yeah, and I think this film is a fine example of what really is the difference between story and plot, in that the story is everything that happens over the course of 15 years. The plot are those particular moments in that story that he chooses to show us. And he just does a masterful job in doing that. 15 years pass, and it seems seamless to us. We have time for about one more question.
All right, I've got a question to your right.
Hi. Oh, actually, yeah, why not you?
We'll have two more questions.
This is very quick. It's just a comment about walking out of frame, because last night one of the questions that was asked that was never answered was, where do they go when they leave? And we're always at the end of Bound. And we're always, this keeps, this lack of information, or this withholding of information on the part of a director always keeps us engaged afterwards. There's always a question, there's always a personal question about that film that goes on and keeps it in memory.
Okay, our last question from the man in the hat.
Well, I interviewed the director as well, and he had a hell of a time with this giant fan that he had to get that perfect little gust of wind at the end. It was this huge, out-of-control fan. But I want to ask, and you kind of touched a bit on this, your personal interpretation of all those many cuts to black, the particular moments they show up, because to me, that is the pendulum killing time, taking us to different extremes in their relationship and kind of showing the running constant of that relationship in their lives.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Listen.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's, films are kind of metaphor treasure hunts. We look for what we want to find, and I think there's so much music in this film, and it's so musically sort of conceived that in a way it's just another way of ending that moment of the song, and then picking up maybe slightly later than you expect. It's a way of handling a very long time span and keeping the rhythm unpredictable, I think. So I defy metaphor. I think it's more about music.
One of my favorite moments in the whole entire film is at the end where they're sitting on the bench after they've taken the pills. And I wonder, it's one of those moments like Jennifer was saying, you wonder what happens when someone walks out of frame. I wondered while they were still in the frame, what happens to them? Are they hugged up together when they're found? Do they fall off the bench? Does the gust of wind roll them around in the weeds? What happens to them? How are they discovered? So, yeah.
A gust of wind blew my Ebertfest hat off my head. And I take that as a metaphor.
I think that's a good way to end.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we'll see you back in an hour.
Thank you.